This right here, it's the most useful and practical lesson in English ATAR made simple.
Everything you need to easily pass English ATAR. English ATAR made simple. Powered by Saints Coaching.
Lesson objectives. We will explain the importance of planning. That is probably on your mind after that little introductory comment. Then we'll outline the planning steps. These steps I expect you to use for every response that you write between now and the end of Year 12, the end of your WACE exam. Then we will apply the first 5 planning steps to pass WACE exam questions. We'll analyze example 1, analyze example 2, analyze example 3, analyze example 4, analyze example 5, analyze example 6. Why so many examples? Because this is the most useful and practical lesson in English ATAR made simple. More examples about how we use the planning steps will help you understand them and then in turn apply them. Then we will explain a final point about planning. I'll highlight a reminder, a very important reminder, and then we'll outline a simple summary. If you take away anything from this entire course, I want it to be the following. You need to plan for every single question. To be clear, when I say every single question, I mean both questions in the comprehending section, the one question you answer in the responding section, the one question you answer in the composing section, and any questions that you answer for school assessments that are based on the comprehending section, responding section, or composing section. Why is planning so important? That is probably what you're wondering. To take a step back, the most common issue students face in English ATAR exams is failing to address every part of the question. This issue is so prevalent because most students don't understand each part of the question or plan haphazardly or not at all. In summary, there are 2 reasons why students fail to address every part of the question. Reason number 1, they don't understand each part of the question. Reason number 2, they don't plan. Since you've completed module 2, you will understand every part of the question. So that is no longer an issue for you. All we have to do now is look at reason number 2, which is planning. And that leads us to our second point about why planning is so important. The planning steps, if properly executed, ensure you'll address every part of every question you answer. A final thing I want to note about planning, failing to plan is planning to fail. All right, I obviously feel pretty passionate about this. Let's move on to the planning steps. The planning steps are, firstly, underline key parts of the question. This requires you to underline the parts of the question that you need to understand and address. Step number 2 is define key parts of the question. At this stage of the planning steps, you will write a brief explanation of what each key part means or write down some synonyms for the part. Step number 3 requires you to reword the question. Here, you'll replace any words in the question with any of the synonyms that came up in step number 2, or you might rearrange the syntax, sentence structure of the question so the relationship between the concepts becomes clearer. Step number 4 is the main step out of all of them, and it is diagram the elements. This requires you to identify the 2 main elements in the question and draw an arrow between them to indicate what their relationship is. Step number 5 is complete the diagram. This step requires you to identify textual evidence and explain how it's relevant to one or more elements in the diagram. Finally, step number 6 is determine structure, and this will be the subject of the next lesson. In short, step number 6 just involves determining how many paragraphs your response will be. And that is the first 5 planning steps. Let's apply them to past WACE exam questions. Our first example is the following question. Explain how the use of setting shapes the construction of one of the characters in this passage. The relevant example is Collected Stories. You gave me Hyacinths by Janet Turner Hospital, published in 2015. We analyzed this question and text in the lesson on characterization in module 2. Our focus in this lesson is obviously a bit different. Summer comes hot and steamy with the heavy smell of raw sugar from the northeast coast of Australia. The cane pushes through the rotting window blinds and grows into the cracks and corners of the mind. It ripens in the heart at night, and its crushed sweetness drips into dreams. I have woken, brushing from my eyelids the silky plumes that burst up into harvest time. And I've stood smoke blackened as the cane fires licked the night sky and kicked my way through the charred stubble after the men have slashed at the naked stalks and sent them churning through the mill. I have walked forever through the honeyed morning air to the crumbling high school brave outpost of another civilization. The class always seemed to be on the point of bulging out the windows. If I shut my eyes and thought hard, I could probably remember all the faces and put a name to each. One never forgets that first year out of teachers' college, the first school, the first students. Dallas comes before anyone else, of course, feline and demanding, blotting out the others. Dallas, who sat stonily bored through classes and never turned in homework and wrote nothing at all on test papers. Can't understand poetry, she said by way of explanation. There were detentions and earnest talks. At least I was earnest. Dallas was bored. She put her case simply. I'll fail everything anyway. But you don't need to, Dallas. It's a matter of your attitude, not your ability. What sort of job will you get if you don't finish high school? I'll work at Valisi's or the kitchen at the mill canteen. Yes, well, but they will be very monotonous jobs, don't you think? Very boring. Yes, flicking back the long blonde hair. Now, just supposing you finished high school, then what would you do? Same thing, work at Valisi's or in the mill canteen. Till I'm married, everybody does. You could go to Brisbane or even Sydney or Melbourne. There are any number of jobs you could get there if you were to finish high school. There would be theatres to go to, plays to see, and libraries. Dallas, this town doesn't even have a library. Silence. Have you ever been out of this town, Dallas? Been to Cairns once. Cairns, 20,000 people and less than 100 miles away, the local idea of the big city. Dallas, what are you going to do with your life? No answer. I felt angry, as though I were the one trapped in the slow rhythm of a small tropical town. Can you possibly be content, I asked viciously, to work at the mill, get married, have babies, and grow old in this shriveled up, sun-blasted village? She was mildly puzzled at my outburst, but shrugged it off as being beyond her. Reckon I'll have to marry the first boy who knocks me up, she said. So, how should we plan for the question? This is our question, and the first step in the planning steps is underline key parts of the question. These are the parts of the question that I would underline. Firstly, how, then use of setting, then shapes, then construction, then one of the characters. That's step one done. Now, step two requires us to define those key parts of the question, starting with the word how. We know from the lesson on language features in Module 2 that how really refers to language features. Regarding the next key part, use of setting, setting just refers to time, place, and mood. For these two key parts of the question, how and use of setting, we've provided a brief explanation. For this next part, the word shapes, we're providing some synonyms, some words that have similar meanings but sound different. So for this, some synonyms of shapes, we've got forms, molds, and influences. Next key part of the question, construction. Once again, we have some synonyms, creation, characterization. Finally, in the passage, you'll recall that there are two main characters. One of them is the teacher, and the other one is Dallas, the student. That's step one and step two done. First one, underline key parts. Second one, define key parts. Let's move on to the third step, which is to reword the question. Our reworded version of the question is explain how the use of setting influences the characterization of Dallas. What we've done is gone from explain how the use of setting shapes the construction of one of the characters in this passage to explain how the use of setting influences the characterization of Dallas. I'm biased, but I personally believe that this version is much more approachable. It reads much easier. Moving on to step number 4, diagram the elements. It's quite difficult for me to explain how to identify the elements in the question. Essentially, you should do it by asking yourself, what are the two main parts of this question that I'm required to answer? The two main terms, phrases, concepts, what are they? Those will typically be the elements. You'll get a better idea for how I identify the two main elements of the question as we go through these examples. In relation to this example, example one main element of the question is the use of setting, and the other one is characterization of Dallas. In terms of what our actual diagram would look like, use of setting leads to characterization of Dallas, and that relationship is indicated by this arrow. So we've diagrammed the elements. Now it is time to complete that diagram. And essentially, this just involves creating a T-chart where we've got the use of setting in the text on this side of the chart and then the construction of Dallas on this side of the chart. Looking at the use of setting first, we know that setting consists of time, place, and mood. Looking at time, one part of the text reads 20,000 people and less than 100 miles away. Australia's conversion to metrification using kilometres instead of miles effectively began around the late 60s, 70s. So the fact that the use of miles is still a thing here tells us the time was in the 20th century, probably at least 50 years ago. In terms of the place, we're also told that it is a small country town 100 miles away from Cairns. We know it's an agricultural place as well. We see words such as harvest time. In terms of the mood, we could say it's claustrophobic. We see that in the following excerpt. The class always seemed to be on the point of bulging out of the windows. And we could also say the mood is monotonous. We see that in Dallas, who sat stonily bored through classes. And this next point, hopeful, is meant to be a separate dot point. We could say the mood is hopeful through, have you ever been out of this town, Dallas? That's what the teacher asked Dallas, as though she still has a glimmer of hope that maybe she will do something with her life. So that is the use of setting in the text. Now let's look at the construction of Dallas, the characterization of Dallas. And one point about Dallas that we can make is she is set on becoming a housewife instead of seeking career opportunities. This is evidence in the text when Dallas says she'll work at Valise's or in the mill canteen till I'm married. Everybody does. Then she also says, reckon I'll have to marry the first boy who knocks me up. We could also say that Dallas doesn't want to be part of life outside the small town, and this is evidence in the text when she just doesn't really reply to her teacher. The narrator just says silence and no answer, and this is Dallas's response or lack of a response when the teacher asks her about Dallas's aspirations. Dallas also says been to Cairns once in response to the teacher's question, have you ever been out of this town? And we see that Cairns is 100 miles away from her hometown, and that's the only place that she's ever been that isn't her hometown. So if it's 100 miles away, she hasn't really seen much of the world. And that is example number 1. Let's check out example number 2. It is the following question from the 2017 WACE exam. Explain how your response to this image has been affected by the arrangement of visual elements within the frame. And this is our image. It is a black and white reproduction from the 2015 feature film, Me, Elle, and the Dying Girl. How would we plan for the question? First step is underline the key parts of it. One key part is how, another key part is your response, affected, arrangement, visual elements, and within the frame. That's step 1, underline key parts. Step number 2 is define key parts. And our first key part is the word how. We know by this stage that how just refers to language features. This is a visual text, so we are talking about visual language features. The next key part of the question is your response. And we know from the last lesson in Module 2 that whenever we have the use of the word you or your in an analytical question, such as this question in the comprehending section, it is an invitation to write in the first person, which means we should use pronouns like I, me, and my. Then we have this word response. We know response is singular, so it means we should articulate one response, and we should articulate that with at least one adjective. Next key part of the question is the word affected, and some synonyms for that are influenced and changed. Another key part of the question is the word arrangement. Once again, some synonyms, placement, positioning, presentation. Also, this word arrangement implies that the placement of visual elements in the frame is intentional. Next key part is visual elements. Elements is plural, meaning we need to discuss at least 2 elements. We need to discuss more than one. And the arrangement of visual elements means you have to discuss how visual elements work together. Finally, the word frame is a reference to the visual language feature of framing, and it suggests that this language feature should be addressed in our answer. Step 3 is rewording the question. This is the original question. Explain how your response to this image has been affected by the arrangement of visual elements within the frame. And this is our reworded version. Explain how the arrangement of visual elements has influenced your response. Step number 4, diagram the elements. Our first main element is arrangement of visual elements, and our second main element is your response. In this case, my response. This is what the relationship between the elements looks like. Arrangement of visual elements, which then leads to my response. Step number 5 is complete the diagram, and this is what the elements look like in that T-chart. As I'm completing the diagram, I encourage you to have the PDF study notes handy, and specifically the relevant text that we're analyzing. First couple of visual elements, we have proximity and rule of thirds. If you're looking at the image, you'll see that the 2 subjects are sitting on opposite sides of the couch, and they're also broken up by the rule of thirds, where the subject on the left occupies the left third, the subject on the right occupies the right third, The central third being vacant and absent creates a distance between the subjects. Another relevant visual element is the symmetrical framing. If you were to slice the image in half, fold it together, you would see a pretty close reflection of the other side. Finally, we've also got facial expression and body language. The subjects look as though something wrong has happened and they're sitting away from each other, as though they're trying to get as far away from one another as they can. That's this part of the diagram. How about my response? In short, I'd say it's a curious response. It's curious because I want to know what caused the divide between both subjects. And that is example number 2. Now let's take a look at example number. It's time to stand. Desk goes up. Oh, that's better. Needed a stretch. It's been a long day of sitting. Where were we? Yes, example 3. This is our relevant question. Analyze how text 1 works to convey an idea about human nature. 2018 WACE exam, section 1, question 1. And text 1 is the following image. It is a black and white reproduction of a photograph taken by Cecilia Wessels of her husband Thunis mowing the lawn of their home in Alberta, Canada. How should we plan for the question? First step is underline the key parts of it, and the first key part is how. Next key part, an idea. Another one, human nature. Step number 2 is define the key parts of the question that we just underlined. First key part is how. This means we should talk about visual language features. Next key part is an idea. And we can see here that it is idea singular, not plural, so we should only discuss one idea. In terms of our definition of an idea, you'll remember from module 2 that it is essentially the specific comment a text makes about a concept, theme, or issue. Finally, the final main part of the question is human nature, and this refers to general behaviors, tendencies, imperfections, or characteristics of humans. Step number 3 is reword the question, and to be honest, I probably wouldn't do that for this question. If the question is already worded in a clear way or rewording it won't make it any clearer, then don't reword it. Take a step. My chair's there. Take a step back and remember why we are planning for questions in English ATAR. We're planning for it so we can understand the question better and then write better in our actual response. If a step, such as rewording the question, isn't going to help us in that pursuit, then there's no point in doing it. Step number 4, diagram the elements. Our first element is how, and our second element is idea about human nature. When we put them in a diagram, we use an arrow, and that relationship looks like this. How, idea about human nature. Basically, what this is asking us is how are language features, visual language features, used to convey an idea about human nature. Step number 5, complete the diagram. This is what the diagram looks like as a T-chart. Looking at how first, remember how just refers to language features. Some relevant visual language features are the juxtaposition between framing, composition, lighting, and ratio. What I mean by this is, firstly, the backyard, which is the foreground, and the world beyond it, which is the background, are juxtaposed through the framing of the image. Regarding composition, the backyard fence creates a kind of division between the home and then nature, which is beyond the fence. In terms of lighting, the foreground is captured in dark hues, and the background is captured in white and grey hues. Finally, regarding ratio, the gargantuan size of the tornado in the background highlights the subject's insignificance in the foreground. The man might well be suited to tame his lawn, but not the tornado behind him. Those are some relevant visual elements. This is a potential idea about human nature. Humans can be so caught up in their own world and miss the bigger picture. A really important point, notice how all of these things contribute to conveying this idea. And that is why diagramming the elements and then completing the diagram is so important. And really, the use of this arrow is so important because it tells us that one must lead to the other. They can't exist in isolation of one another. They don't exist in silos. One thing in this question, visual elements, leads to another. In this question, this idea about human nature. And that is our third example done. We're halfway. Let's do the final 3, starting with example 4. This is the relevant question. Explain how 3 visual language features in this image engage you in the world of the bodyboarder. 2019 WACE exam section 1, question 1. And this is the relevant image. It's a black and white reproduction of a photograph featuring on a web page titled 22 Crazy Perspective Photos Taken with a GoPro Camera. How should we plan for the question? Hopefully you know by this stage. Firstly, we will underline key parts of it. We will underline how, then 3 language features, then engage you, the world of the bodyboarder. How tells us we need to talk about visual language features. Then you might be wondering, because visual language features is actually in the question, what happens when that's the case? Pretty much one just cancels the other out. And obviously, because this question specifies 3 visual language features, we must concentrate on 3 main visual language features. You can discuss language features that fall within those 3, just make sure you articulate what the 3 main ones are that you are talking about. For instance, positioning is a visual language feature that includes foreground, midground, and background. In that example, positioning could be one of my 3 main visual language features, and talking about midground, foreground, and background could fall within that main one. Next main part of the question is the word engage. Some synonyms for this one: capture, captivate, attract, immerse, involve. Next main part is the word you. Once again, this is an invitation to write in the first person, accept it. Finally, the world of the body border. This means we must articulate what the world of the body border is. We could say things like it involves adrenaline and exhilaration, danger and risk, and it looks at the symbiosis between human and nature. Next planning step is reword the question. We're going from explain how 3 visual language features in this image engage you in the world of the body border to explain how 3 visual language features immerse you in the world of the body border. What we've done here is switch out the word engage for immerse, and have also taken out the words in this image, so it just reads shorter. Then we have diagram the elements. These are the main elements of the question. Firstly, 3 visual language features, and secondly, the world of the body border. This is what this relationship looks like in diagram form. We've got 3 visual language features leading to the world of the body border. How do those 3 visual language features immerse me in the world of the body border? Step number 5 is complete the diagram. This is our T-chart of the elements. Let's look at 3 visual language features first. One of those visual language features could be the framing and how that relates to the text. It captures the body border in the barrel of the wave in such a way that the static wave looks like it's creating a sort of shelter for the subject. Compare that to how the wave would look if it was captured in a video. It would look as though it's about to engulf the body border. Another visual language feature is juxtaposition. The body border and his aquatic surroundings in the foreground are juxtaposed with the cityscape in the background. Finally, camera angle. The POV camera angle engages me in the world of the body border by making me feel like I'm actually bodyboarding behind the subject, like I'm in the barrel of the wave with the person in the image. That is this main element of the question. Now let's look at the world of the body border. As we said earlier, you would need to articulate what the world of the body border is. And I've just said here, it's one that creates a symbiosis between human and nature. Symbiosis kind of means a relationship between 2 things and they're codependent, like the black sludge thing that eats up Venom in the movie Venom. Venom is a symbiosis of the black sludge thing and the human. That is our 4th example. Let's look at example number 5. This is show how relationships between people and animals are represented differently in text 2 and 3, 2017 WACE exam. Section 1, question 3. Remember that your WACE exam no longer has a question 3 in the comprehending section. Text number 2 is called As the River Runs. It's a novel excerpt. And text number 3 is Pets Aloud. It is a feature article excerpt. Follow along as I read them out. This is text number 2. The snake moves like mercury poured on the ferociously red gravel. It grips the back of the lizard's neck and syringes venom in calculated overdoses. Scuffed arcs either side show where the blue tongue has put up its fight, but now it and the 2-meter king brown are absorbed only by death. The lizard froths at the mouth, cells saturated by poison, but obstinate survival instincts force its tough little body and crazed mind to resist. Every now and then, its tail arcs, signaling both insolence and complete hopelessness. She can take some poison. I'd have been well dead by now, breathes Vincent Yimmy, hanging back, mesmerized by the spectacle. The sun is silver on its ringlet body. Reckon, replies Dylan Ward. Don't you get too close, says Vincent, watching uncomfortably as a young bloke crams in so that he can see the diamond in the snake's eyes. She's too busy to worry about me. Dylan had been watching, almost motionless, for minutes when Vincent noticed him and wandered up. I don't like them snakes. Should leave them well alone, he murmurs, scuffing the red Australian dirt with his boots, adjusting the silver Elvis sunglasses he found on a street years ago, and that are now his trademark. They cover yellowed eyes crusted with glaucoma. His black skin, so deep and dark that it sucks in the sunlight and leaves his face almost featureless, is glistening with an oily, nervous sweat. Uncle Vincent Yimmy. You don't want snakes of no sorts around you. The lizard's stumpy legs suddenly run in the air, and the king brown's head picks up the rhythm and squirts in more lethal sap. Pseudocus Australia doing its thing. Taliqua multifasciata finally getting the message. You know about us Aborigines Dreamtime snakes? The rainbow serpent that made the universe, and another one that made the rivers, pools, and springs. Vincent changing the subject. Dreamtime snake is like our mother, the earth, the story of this place. That is text number 2, As the River Runs. This is text number 3, Pets Allowed. What a wonderful time it is for the scammer, the conniver, and the cheat. The underage drinkers who flash fake IDs, the parents who use a phony address so that their child can attend a more desirable school, the customers with 11 items who stand in the express lane. The latest group to bend the law is pet owners. Take a look around. See the St. Bernard slobbering over the spring onions at the supermarket? Isn't that a Rottweiler sitting third row, mezzanine, at the concert hall? As you will have observed, an increasing number of your neighbours have been keeping company with their pets in human-only establishments, cohabiting with them in animal-unfriendly apartment buildings and dormitories, and taking them free onto aeroplanes, simply by claiming that the creatures are their licensed companion animals and are necessary to their mental well-being. No government agency keeps track of such figures, but in 2011, the National Service Animal Registry, a commercial enterprise that sells certificates, vests, and badges for helper animals, signed up 2,400 emotional support animals. Last year, it registered 11,000. What about the mental well-being of everyone else? One person's emotional support can be another person's emotional trauma. Last May, for instance, a woman brought her large service dog, Truffles, on a US Airways flight from Los Angeles to Philadelphia. At 35,000 feet, the dog squatted in the aisle and, according to Chris Law, a passenger who tweeted about the incident, did what dogs do. After the second installment, the crew ran out of detergent and paper towels. Plane is emergency landing cause people are getting sick, Law tweeted. Biohazard team needs to board. The woman and Truffles disembarked to applause in Kansas City, and she offered her inconvenienced fellow passengers Starbucks gift cards. Those are our texts. How should we plan for the question? Step number 1, underline key parts of the question. First key part is the word show. Another one is how. Another one, relationship between people and animals. Then represented. And finally, differently. Step number 2 is to define those key parts of the question. Synonyms for the word show include explain and discuss. Then next part of the question, how. This means we need to discuss written language features because they are 2 written texts. Next key part of the question, relationship between people and animals. This requires us to specify how each text describes relationship between people and animals. The word represented, as we know from the relevant lesson in Module 2, means represented. How are relationships between people and animals represented in both texts? Finally, the word differently means we must discuss one representation of relationships between people and animals in text 2, and then we must discuss one different representation of relationships between people and animals in text 3. Reword the question? No. Personally, rewording it wouldn't make it clearer, and all the words in the question are pretty straightforward, so not going to bother. But that is just me. Maybe you can find a way that would make it easier to understand for you, in which case, great. Step number 4, diagram the elements. Our first main part of the question is relationship between people and animals. Second main part of the question, represented differently. Shown in diagram form, this means relationships between people and animals and how that leads to how they're represented differently. That is the relationship between the main elements of the question. Step number 5 is complete the diagram. This is what the elements look like in a flowchart. Let's take a look at the relationship between people and animals part firstly, and specifically in relation to text number 2. One might say relationship between people and animals are represented as respectfully distant in light of the human understanding that animals killing other animals is a necessary part of any ecosystem. In text number 2, we see the characters observing 2 animals going at each other, and they're allowing that to happen. It's a necessary part of any ecosystem. Regarding text number 3, we could say that relationships between people and animals are represented as obnoxiously interdependent. The word obnoxious just means extremely unpleasant, and interdependent means that there is some sort of coexistence or there's a dependency between 2 things. In the case of text 3, there's a dependency between animals and humans. Dogs and humans. That's this main element of the question. How about the how they're represented differently element of the question? In relation to text 2, we've got the use of Australian slang. I don't like them snakes. Should leave them well alone. She's too busy to worry about me. You don't want snakes of no sorts around you. We've also got scientific jargon. Pseudechus Australia doing its thing. Taliqua multifasciata, finally getting the message. That's how the relationship between people and animals is represented in text 2. Then, what about text 3? We've got rhetorical questions. See the St. Bernard slobbering over the spring onions at the supermarket. Isn't that a Rottweiler sitting third row, mezzanine at the concert hall? What about the mental well-being of everyone else? We've also got a balanced sentence. One person's emotional support can be another person's emotional trauma. See the LFB for the definition of a balanced sentence. And finally, we have a euphemism. The dog squatted and did what dogs do, after the second installment. That is example number 5, done and dusted. Let's look at our final example, example number 6. Relevant question. Compare how a similar idea about swimming is treated in text 1 and text 2. We analyze this question in the lesson on concepts, themes, issues, and ideas, and we analyze text 1 in the lesson on voice. Text 1 is the best in the world, a love letter to Australia's public pools, except this excerpt is a little bit longer than the one that we looked at in Module 2 in the lesson on voice. My parents were Cantonese migrants from Hong Kong who, in the 1970s, moved to Queensland's Sunshine Coast, home to some of the country's most beautiful beaches. It still strikes me as a slightly baffling decision, given neither of them could swim. Water compelled and terrified them and their 5 Australian-born kids. While other people saw stunning coastlines, we just saw a picturesque way to die. Rips could kill you, people said. Sharks could kill you. Skin cancer could kill you. Weirdly, it was always white people who told us these things, the same white people who seemed to keep going to the beach. Were we missing something? Did they want to die? A safer option was the public pool. Years of TV safety campaigns had convinced Mum we needed to know how to swim, because she sure as hell couldn't save us if we were drowning. Throughout summer, we'd wail as Mum drove us to the nearest suburban leisure centre for lessons. I suspect we dreaded those lessons as much as our instructors dreaded teaching us, those hopeless Asian kids spluttering with anxiety inside the enclosed training pool. Those stinking hothouses of chemicals, piss, and wet togs, or cozies, or bathers, or swimmers, depending on your state. After the nightmare was over, we'd be sedated with a treat, a redskin. Australians veer towards racism, even with our confectionery, an ice block or a packet of frogs, before falling asleep in the stuffy Ford Cortina, hair matted to our temples, seatbelts twisted in our skin, and fingers dusted orange from the twisties we stole from each other. The horror didn't end there. At school, not only were swimming lessons mandatory, carnivals were too. Annual, school-run swim meets, ostensibly fun but deeply competitive. We even had togs in school colours that we had to buy from the uniform shop. During the lessons, I'd watch fit white kids dive in and carve through water with graceful limbs that seemed custom built for the job. Meanwhile, in lane 1 or 6, where I could still hold onto the wall, I'd windmill uselessly, my hands banging into the water like saucepans. There was a direct inverse correlation between the amount of splashing I made and the distance I travelled. At swimming carnivals, all the outcasts were bunched together. The ethnic kid with no body fat, me, pale kids with lots of body fat. We had to swim in an event, any event, so we do the novelty race, paddling together on inflatable rafts, damp with chlorine and shame, as everyone cheered and jeered us on. But then, weirdly, I fell in love with swimming. I left home for university, moved to Brisbane, and into a rambling architectural mess of a shared house. Its design was incorrect. It attracted the heat in summer, then trapped it. During heat waves, my flatmates and I would emerge from our rooms having barely slept and looking boiled. I took refuge from the heat at the Olympic-sized council pool at the bottom of our hill. It didn't look like much from the outside, but inside it was pure and clean, with a panoramic view of the city skyline. I didn't have proper togs, so I swam in black boxer briefs, hoping no one would notice. After a while, I tried swimming laps. "Alan!" The pool manager took pity on me. "Instead of bashing into the water with your arms like that," he said, "stretch out like this and twist your entire torso. Instead of exhaling like that, hum and you won't lose your breath so quickly." It was homework and I'd always liked homework. Slowly, I got faster. That's text 1. Text 2 is Wavelength. It's a novel excerpt. He's drawn to the blue light beaming down over the pool, and he's not the only one. There are dozens of insects softly smacking at the floodlight that shines like a beacon. He wonders if they confuse it with the moon. At least they leave him alone as he sits at the base of the light pole. In front of him, the 50-meter pool stretches out like iridescent silk. The surface is unruffled and tight, as if you could peel it back like a layer of skin. Oliver runs his hand through the water again, and it's not cold at all. Ripples arc out, sliding all the way to the shallow end. He relocates himself and the books to the edge so he can submerge his feet and calves. The water feels warm and thick, and it relaxes his leg and everything else in him. He notices the subtle reflection of stars. The lane is long and straight in front of him, longer than he remembers when 3 mornings a week were dedicated to trawling lanes like these. 400-meter warm-ups, 400-meter kicking, 8 times 50-meter sprints, 600-meter medley, and 400-meter cooldown, all before school. Back then, a lap could take 40 seconds or 38 if he tried really hard. Oliver recalls his arms spearing the surface, the frenzy of bubbles and gasping for air at the end. A lap wasn't very long back then, not like it looks now. Is it nostalgia that coaxes him to his feet? Standing on the platform just before a race was the most exhilarating part. He would fold himself over, his webbed toes spreading across the edge of the platform. In those seconds before the starter's gun, nothing else in the world mattered. His head would throb with his pulse. His guts would drop to his chest. He dared not breathe, his body waiting for the signal, followed by the frightening burst of power and speed and everything. It was terrifying and addictive. He often wondered what he might have achieved, how far he could have gotten if his dad never left and he had kept on swimming. Well, that's a bit of a sad end to that excerpt. How should we plan for the question? By this stage, we know. Step number 1, underline key parts of the question. First key part, compare, then how, similar idea about swimming, treated. Step number 2, define key parts of the question. First key part, compare. This requires us to address the similarities and differences. Next key part, how, written language features. Next key part, similar idea about swimming. An idea, as we know, is a specific comment on a concept, theme, or issue. Swimming is a concept. Therefore, what similar comment about swimming does each text make? You might be wondering, because there are 2 texts and we're required to compare how a similar idea about swimming is treated in each, whether we should discuss one idea or 2. This is what the 2021 Good Answers book has to say about that question. What I'm about to read out comes from page 60. Whilst the question asks for similar ideas, this did not mean it needed to be the same idea. Rather, some form of commonality should have been determined. Basically, you can refer to one idea from each text as long as the similarity between them is made clear. Next main part of the question, the word treated. A synonym for this is the word constructed. On that note, our next planning step is reword the question. Step 3, this is the original question. Compare how a similar idea about swimming is treated in text 1 and text 2. And the reworded version, compare how similar ideas about swimming are constructed in the texts. Step number 4, diagram the elements. Compare how similar ideas about swimming are constructed in the text. What are the main elements? First one, similar ideas about swimming. Second one, constructed. This is what they look like when they are in the diagram. Similar ideas about swimming and how each is constructed. Step number 5, complete the diagram. This is what the T-chart looks like. Let's discuss these similar ideas about swimming first, and specifically in relation to text 1. One potential idea is that swimming in public pools, despite its challenge, is a convenient way to take refuge from the Australian heat. Regarding text 2, an idea is swimming is a graceful, meditative, and challenging act. Next main part of the question, how each idea is constructed. Looking at text 1, focusing on the convenient way to take refuge part of the idea. We've got lexical choice, diction, and binary language. Rambling, architectural mess, incorrect, trapped, barely slept, looking boiled, versus refuge, pure and clean, panoramic view, I got faster. So we've got these words and the connotations of these words here versus these words and the connotations of them, and they form binary opposites. In terms of the challenging part of this idea, how is that constructed? We've got a balanced sentence, ostensibly fun, but deeply competitive. We've also got connotative language. I'd windmill uselessly. There was a direct inverse correlation between the amount of splashing I made and the distance I traveled. The effect of these parts of the text are basically just saying he was a shit swimmer. How is this idea constructed in text 2? Firstly, the graceful and meditative part of the idea, we've got figurative language. Specifically, similes, floodlight that shines like a beacon, the 50-meter pool stretches out like iridescent silk. There's also a metaphor, confuse it with the moon. And then in terms of the challenging part of this idea, there's long syntax interspersed with short syntax. For instance, he dared not breathe, his body waiting for the signal, followed by the frightening burst of power and speed and everything. long syntax. It was terrifying, short syntax, and addictive, short syntax. That wraps up our discussion of the 6 examples that illustrate how to apply the planning steps. Let's discuss a final point about planning. But first, I am going to take a seat. My old man body is sore. Desk goes. Firstly, you're doing EAMS because you want to improve your English ATAR mark. The concepts and strategies that are taught in EAMS will help you improve your mark. If you don't apply what you're learning in EAMS to your English assessments, you won't improve your mark. This is a roundabout way of saying planning is only useful if you actually do it. That's an obvious point, but every student I have tutored has made the following mistake. So I'm making such a big deal out of this so you don't have to make this mistake. The following chain of events has occurred every single time once I've taught them the planning steps that we just learnt. Firstly, they learn the planning steps, then they fail to use the planning steps in their next in-class assessment. Then they aren't happy with their mark. They bring the assessment to our next tutoring session. I ask, where's the plan? They say, I forgot to plan or I didn't have time. All of that is to say, the mistake every single student I have tutored has made is they have failed to implement the planning steps in English assessments as soon as they've learned them. This is problematic because you're simply delaying the process of mastering these steps and ultimately getting better in English. Why have all of my past students made the mistake of not implementing the planning steps as soon as they've learned them? As we saw in that chain of events, students will always say either they forgot or they didn't have time. The first excuse is invalid. The second, I can understand. You've probably wondered at some point in this lesson, how on earth am I going to use all the planning steps for a comprehending section question when I only have 30 minutes to answer the question? The annoying but honest answer to that question is practice. With practice, I swear you will be able to execute all of the planning steps, including the one that we're going over in the next lesson, in 5 to 10 minutes. And I wouldn't say that unless I meant it. These are the very steps that I created 1 month before my WACE exam that boosted my overall mark by 9%. I practiced them on past WACE exam questions every single day of that month, and I just got faster at completing them. I practiced, I got better. So if practice is the key, what does practicing the planning steps look like? In short, complete the related PDF activities for this lesson and start using these planning steps in every comprehending section that you have to answer ASAP. As I said at the beginning of the lesson, you should use the planning steps whenever you answer any exam question. What we've just done is outlined the planning steps for comprehending section questions. We will go through the planning steps for responding section questions and composing section questions in the corresponding modules. Lots of steps are the same, and there are some slight variations. Before we wrap up, a quick reminder, and that is complete the remaining PDF activities in EAMS by handwriting instead of typing them. For modules 1 and modules 2 and the activities for those lessons, I told you to type your responses to those activities because they constitute your study notes and it's useful to have digital copies of those. However, the remaining workbook activities in EAMS focus on writing responses because you must write instead of type your responses in an English exam. Typing practice responses is not an effective way to prepare for handwritten assessments. Typing all of your practice responses instead of handwriting them is like learning how to ride a bike on an exercise stationary bike instead of an actual push bike. Technically, you can say, yeah, I can ride a bike, but it's not the bike that everyone actually cares about being able to ride. The same is true if you're going to complete a practice exam, for instance. If you're going to type that 3-hour practice exam, yeah, it's not a bad effort, but are you going to be typing your exam when it comes to exam day? You're not preparing in the right way. You need to write that practice exam. Typing practice responses instead of handwriting them means you're just sabotaging your exam performance. You're not training your hand muscles to write. You can type faster than you can write, and the font size that you type in differs from the font size that you handwrite in. You'll be making your life a lot harder come exam day if all you've done is typed practice responses. Handwrite those practice responses and study smarter, not harder. So, handwriting your responses to the workbook activities from this point onwards is the most effective way to prepare for the WACE exam. To bring this point home, every practice response you complete in preparing for a handwritten English assessment should be handwritten. All right, that's all the main content for this lesson. Simple summary time. First main part of the lesson, we discussed the importance of planning. If you were to remember one thing from EAMS, it's that you need to plan for every single question. The planning steps, if properly executed, ensure you'll address every part of every question you answer. Further to that, failing to plan is planning to fail. We then outlined what the planning steps are. Step 1, underline key parts of the question. Step 2, define key parts of the question. Step 3, reword the question. Step 4, diagram the elements. Step 5, complete the diagram. Step 6, determine structure, which is the subject of next lesson. Then we spent the bulk of this lesson applying the first 5 planning steps to past WACE exam questions. Example 1 was explain how the use of setting shapes the construction of one of the characters in this passage. The main elements, which is really the main step of the planning steps, are use of setting leads to construction of Delis. Example number 2, it was explain how your response to this image has been affected by the arrangement of visual elements within the frame. The main parts of that question were arrangement of visual elements and how that leads to my response. Example number 3 was analyze how text 1 works to convey an idea about human nature. Main parts of the question, how leads to idea about human nature. Example number 4, we've got explain how 3 visual language features in this image engage you in the world of the body border. Main elements of the question, 3 visual language features lead to world of a body border. Then example number 5, show how relationships between people and animals are represented differently in text 2 and 3. Elements, relationships between people and animals, that leads to how they're represented differently. Final example was compare how a similar idea about swimming is treated in text 1 and text 2. Main elements of the question, similar ideas about swimming, how each idea is constructed. Then we discussed a final point about planning, which is planning is only useful if you actually do it. Last but not least, a reminder, which is complete the remaining workbook activities in EAMS by handwriting instead of typing them. Every practice response you complete in preparing for a handwritten English assessment should be handwritten. Okay, that is all for this lesson. I said at the beginning of the lesson that this is the most useful lesson in English ATAR made simple. That is true only if you practice these planning steps over and over and over again. I understand that writing, especially under time conditions, is dreadful. But I honestly would not harp on about it so much if there was anything else that helped your exam performance more. I've already told you this, I repeat this story a lot. Practice writing under time conditions was single-handedly responsible for helping me boost my mark by 10% in a month. So please bear that in mind as you complete the activities for this lesson. Completing these activities is especially important because they set you up to complete the activities for the next 3 lessons. In other words, you need to do the activities for this lesson in order to progress in this module. So all the best with that, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Until then, keep it simple.